I wanted to put up this brief video to address one basic issue that constantly resurfaces. It may take the form of several different questions. Why does my paint always come out rough? I can't seem to get a smooth surface. Why do I always get a buildup of rough pebbly paint in the corners? Why is the paint so thick along a masked edge? All these questions have their basis in the one constant of air painting, overspray, and not the stuff that shows up on the paper under your model. As your airbrush mixes paint with air, there's a central portion where there's a greater amount of paint. As you move outward, the paint becomes more dispersed with air. This over-atomized paint is called overspray. Looking at a single pass with a typical airbrush, you can see that there's a central portion that looks as if it's relatively solid paint, and it's bordered by a diminishing fade-out of the paint. This border of overspray is the bread and butter for airbrush artists who rely on these wonderful fades. However, if your goal is to lay down a solid color or primer, then this overspray is your worst enemy. Let's look at what happens when you have a large surface that you've tried to paint with the same airbrush. As you can see, the majority of the surface is covered in overspray, and some of it's even overlapped. Even if the strokes are closer together, the amount of overspray surrounding each pass will remain constant, and you'll only increase the amount of surface that's covered in overspray and fog. This is even a bigger problem with acrylics because they dry so fast and their properties don't allow you to re-wet the surface like a lacquer. So many times I see modelers trying to work around this problem by overthinning the paint, trying to pass paint through too tiny of an orifice, thinking that it'll keep the surface wetter. Thinner is not retarder. Overthinning the paint will only cause problems as it'll destroy the cohesive structure of the paint. Paint should only be thinned enough to be taken up and well atomized by a proper-sized air painting tool. The same also goes for retarder. There's a limit to how much you can add. The solution is to create a larger central portion of smooth paint while minimizing the amount of overspray, and this is the forte of larger airbrushes and miniature spray guns. Why do I always get a buildup of rough pebbly paint in the corners? When you blast over-atomized paint into a corner, you're going to have a lot of bounce back and fog that'll stick to the surrounding areas and never make it into the corner. It can happen on a much smaller scale, like into panel lines. How many times have you seen a really up-close image of a proud modeler's latest work, and the wash that's been applied into the panel lines is fuzzy and it fluffs out at times? The panel line is full of grain from the overly dry paint. The solution's the same as the previous issue. You need to approach the corner with well-atomized paint, not over-atomized dust. Why is the paint so thick along a masked edge? This is sort of a multi-part issue. Some of it relates to what I've been discussing. Building up layers of overspray causes a thick, grainy layer, but this can be made better or worse depending on the thickness of the mask and the angle of the paint spray over the tape. Always paint against the thinnest material possible and keep the spray at 90 degrees or slightly back over the tape edge. This will minimize paint from building up into the corner formed from the tape. Finally, one more important factor about spraying paint: atomization. The better the paint's atomized, the smoother the surface. You'd think this is so elementary that it should go without saying, but so many times I've seen this airbrush recommended as the workhorse. And I must admit, it was my first and only airbrush when I was new to air painting and quite frankly didn't know any better. These images are from slides I took many years ago when I used to do live presentations on airbrushing and decals. Here's one of my Pache Model H's, along with the largest airbrush that I owned at the time. It's a Thayer & Chandler Model C that was actually designed for larger areas like window decorating. Compare the atomization of the external mix Pache Model H with the much finer atomization of the internal mix Thayer & Chandler. Which one do you think will give you a smoother finish? For that reason, I quit painting with an external mix airbrush a long time ago. I hope keeping this video focused strictly on the smoothest overall finish was successful at bringing together all the pertinent little bits that have been scattered throughout my various airbrush videos.